It's just after 9 o'clock on a warm June night in 1954. A man in a dark suit steps out of his law office, walks to his car parked in an alley off Fifth Avenue, and reaches for the door handle. He is 60 years old. He is a decorated war veteran. And in 11 days, he is supposed to become the man who finally cleans up the most lawless town in America. He never gets the chance. A figure steps out of the shadows, presses a pistol against his face, and fires 3 times. Within minutes, he's dead on the sidewalk. But here's the part nobody expected. This single murder is about to bring the National Guard rolling into an American city, put an entire town on trial, and drag down one of the highest law officers in the state. Not because of who pulled the trigger, but because of who it turned out he was protecting. To understand why one killing brought down a whole city, you first have to understand the town they called Sin City, USA. Welcome to Mortwick, the dark records. Phenix City sits in Russell County, Alabama, right on the state line, separated from Columbus, Georgia, by a single river. And for the better part of 40 years, that river was more than geography, it was a business model. From the days of Prohibition in the 1920s, straight through to the early 1950s, this town ran on 3 things: illegal gambling, bootleg liquor, and prostitution. Not hidden in back rooms, out in the open, as the local economy. The crime syndicates didn't fear the law here, they owned it. Police officers, judges, city officials, reportedly a large share of them, were quietly on the payroll, paid to look the other way. When the men who are supposed to enforce the law are collecting an envelope every week to ignore it, the law stops being a rule, it becomes a suggestion. So Phenix City had a police force in roughly the same way a nightclub has a bouncer, technically there to keep order, mostly there to make sure the right people got in. Just across the river was Fort Benning, one of the largest army posts in the country. Thousands of young soldiers, thousands of paychecks, and one town happy to relieve them of every dollar. A 1954 Army report found that Phenix City had more cases of venereal disease and violence per person than any other city in America. The rot was so notorious that General George Patton, yes, that Patton, stationed at Fort Benning during the war, publicly threatened to take his tanks across the river and flatten the place. He never did. But the fact that a 4-star general wanted to solve a vice problem with armored divisions tells you exactly how far gone this town was. And speaking of things that roll in and take over, hit that subscribe button now, before the algorithm forgets you the way this town forgot the law. Do it, and the bell too, so you don't miss the moment the tanks actually show up. Enter Albert Leon Patterson. Born in 1894, a school teacher turned lawyer who opened his practice right here in Phenix City in 1933. He was no outsider. He'd built his life in this town. He'd even, by his own admission, once done legal work tangled up with its shadier side. Which is exactly what made him dangerous. He knew where every body was buried, because he'd helped file the paperwork. He'd fought in World War I, been wounded in France, and earned the French Croix de Guerre for it. This was not a man who scared easily. In early 1954, Patterson announced he was running for Attorney General of Alabama, the state's top law officer, and he ran on one promise, blunt and personal. He would clean up Phenix City, not reform it, not study it, end it. In the May Democratic primary, he won the most votes, but it went to a runoff. And here, in a town where elections were a contact sport, things got ugly. After a contested runoff on June 10th, the Democratic Executive Committee declared Patterson the winner. For Patterson, that nomination was a death warrant with a victory headline. Because the men who ran Phenix City had just watched the one person who could dismantle their entire operation get one step from the most powerful legal office in the state. If you're the kind of person who sees a man walk into an obvious trap and thinks, no, don't go to the car, do the story a favor and drop a comment telling us, would you have kept running for that office? I read them. 8 days after being declared the nominee, on the night of June 18, 1954, Albert Patterson worked late at his office in the Coulter building. Around 9 o'clock, he stepped out and walked to his car, parked in an alley off Fifth Avenue, next to a spot called the Elite Cafe. Someone was waiting. According to the account preserved in the records, the killer pushed a gun into Patterson's mouth and fired. 3 shots. He staggered, and within minutes he was gone. One detail from the scene is chilling in its precision. Investigators later reported a cartridge lodged where 2 or 3 of his front teeth had been knocked out. Whoever did this stood close enough to look him in the eye. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message, and everyone in Phenix City understood exactly what it said. The syndicate's plan was simple: silence the one man who could ruin them, and everything goes back to normal. It's the same logic as unplugging the smoke alarm, because it won't stop beeping. Technically the noise does stop. It's just that now the house is still on fire, and you've made it worse, because the murderers made one catastrophic miscalculation. They thought killing Patterson would end the story. Instead, it detonated it. The morning after the murder, June 19th, Major General Walter Hanna, the head of the Alabama National Guard, arrived in Phenix City to see the situation for himself. What he found stunned him. The local law enforcement he was supposed to coordinate with was itself part of the criminal machine. His recommendation went up the chain, and on July 22nd, Governor Gordon Persons did something almost unheard of in modern American history. Acting as Commander-in-Chief of the state's National Guard, he declared martial law over Russell County. The state of Alabama effectively invaded one of its own towns, and the Guard did not come to negotiate. They disarmed the local police. They confiscated their badges. They voided every weapons permit in the county. By the next day they'd seized dozens of pistols and even a submachine gun. They shut the gambling houses. They suspended the liquor licenses. Within 2 weeks they'd jailed the mayor himself for neglecting his duties. Picture the entire corrupt establishment of a town waking up to find soldiers taking their guns, their badges, and their casinos in the same week. It was less a police operation and more a season finale where the writers decided to kill off every character at once. Then came the legal avalanche. A special grand jury and a team of prosecutors went to work. Over the following months they handed down indictment after indictment, by most accounts more than 700 of them, against police officers, elected officials, judges, and business owners tied to the syndicate. In roughly 6 months, the entire criminal structure that had ruled this town for 40 years was dismantled. 40 years of untouchable corruption, gone in 6 months, and this channel puts one of these out every few days. Ring the bell so you're there when the whole thing collapses, instead of hearing about it 40 years too late like the rest of Alabama. But the question that had started all of it still hung over everything. Who killed Albert Patterson? And when the investigators finally named names, the answer was worse than anyone in Phenix City had feared, because it didn't stop at the town line. It ran all the way up to the top of the state. 3 men were indicted for the murder. The first was Albert Fuller, the chief deputy sheriff of Russell County. The very lawman whose job was to protect the public was charged with gunning down the man about to become the state's top prosecutor. Fuller was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The second was Arch Farrell, the county's own circuit solicitor, its chief local prosecutor. He was tried for the murder and acquitted. And the third name is the one that turned a town scandal into a state earthquake. Silas Garrett, known as C. Garrett, the outgoing Attorney General of the state of Alabama himself, the very office Patterson had just won. The state's highest law officer, indicted in connection with the assassination of the man about to replace him. Let that land. The sitting Attorney General, the person whose entire job is to prosecute murderers, ends up indicted in a murder. It's the plot twist you'd roll your eyes at in a movie, like finding out the fire chief has been quietly moonlighting as an arsonist. But Garrett never faced a jury. In the months after Patterson's murder, he was reported to be convalescing in a mental institution, and he was never brought to trial. What was really going on inside his mind? A genuine breakdown, or a convenient escape hatch from the courtroom, is something the historical record doesn't fully settle. What we can say for certain is this: the outgoing Attorney General of Alabama was formally accused in the killing, and the state never got to test that accusation in open court. So the loop that opened this story closes here. A man was murdered for promising to enforce the law, and the trail led not to some outside gangster, but to the officials sworn to uphold it, right up to the top law officer in the state. In November of 1954, under the watch of the National Guard, Phenix City held what was described as its first genuinely free election in living memory. In January 1955, martial law was finally lifted. The soldiers went home. The casinos did not reopen, and the ending has a strange symmetry. Albert Patterson's son, John Patterson, stepped into the very office his father had died to win, elected Attorney General of Alabama and later governor of the state. The bullet meant to bury a reform movement instead handed it a martyr, a mandate, and a successor. The story became so infamous that Hollywood turned it into a movie the very next year. The town that had been Sin City, USA, became, almost overnight, a national symbol of what happens when corruption is finally cornered. Here's what makes Phenix City linger. This wasn't the story of one villain. There was no single mastermind, no criminal genius pulling strings from a smoky room. It was something quieter and far more unsettling, an entire town, its police, its courts, its officials, that simply agreed year after year to live outside the law and got very comfortable doing it. Corruption here wasn't a crime committed against the town, it was the town. It took one man willing to die for the truth to break the spell, and it took his death to make anyone act. Which leaves a question that outlives everyone in this story. How many towns, how many institutions sit exactly like Phenix City did, perfectly functional, perfectly quiet, right up until the moment someone finally refuses to look the other way? Albert Patterson never served a single day as Attorney General, but 8 days of being the man who said no did more to that town than 40 years of everyone else saying yes. If this story got its hooks into you, subscribe and turn on the bell, because Phenix City is one of dozens of places where the people sworn to protect the truth were the ones burying it, and we're digging every one of them back up. Don't be the town that looks the other way. This has been Mortwick, The Dark Records.